Imagine you're 25 years old and you flew over to another country to study French literature. You're a lonely student in the big bustling city of France, trying to make new friends. A small, polite Japanese man who is studying in the same class as you makes conversation with you. Slowly, over time, you become friends, studying together, going for coffees together, eating dinner at each other's home like friends do. Then one night, you go over to your friend's house. You're sat down on his sofa, chatting away with your now good friend. He goes away to make some dinner for himself and you. You stand up from the sofa. You go to his apartment window in the living room, overlooking the nice view of the bustling streets of Paris. And then, your life is over. This is the horrifying true story of Issei Sagawa. Issei Sagawa was a Japanese man born in April 26, 1949. He was born in Kobe, Hyogo, in Japan. Born into an affluent family, his dad, Akira Sagawa, was the president of Curry Water Industries. His granddad was also the editor of the Japanese newspaper, the Asahi Shimbun. Issei went to school in Kanagawa. This is where his fascination of wanting to eat human flesh started. In interviews with Issei, he reported that he, quote, used to stare at boys' thighs, having desires of cannibalism even in the first grade. He also reported that his parents never talked about sex, and that apparently, in his words, he used to feel sexually frustrated and confused, and he didn't know why. Therefore, that meant he, sadly, experimented with his dog. He was often seen as an introverted kid, lacking desire to play sports, but he excelled in literature, a passion that would eventually take him far. He went to Waco Uni in Tokyo to study English literature. It was actually here in Waco, Issei Sagawa decided to put his dream to practice for the first time. He targeted a woman who went to his university. This woman actually lived in the same apartment block as Issei's grandma did, so he knew the area and where she lived very well. One night, he went into the apartment block, snuck in, unlocking her front door. He went into her bedroom. He stood over her, however, his knees touched her stomach and she woke up. She pushed him as hard as she could, and eventually the police came to arrest him. He was charged with sexual assault. However, his dad ended up paying the victim a settlement grant. Therefore, the charges were dropped, and with it came a clean criminal record for Issei. Throughout all of this, he never revealed to anyone his true intentions. His intentions being he was going to knock her out with an umbrella, go into the kitchen and grab a knife and carve a piece of flesh out of her buttock so he could eat it. He went into a building that night on the sole fact of wanting to know what human flesh would taste like. Issei relocated to Paris, France in 1977 and enrolled in Sorbonne in Paris, where he would study for a PhD in French literature. It was here his desire to kill with the intent of cannibalism grew. Almost every night he would hire prostitutes with the intentions of murdering them, but he never managed to pull it off. In an interview, he would say that his fingers would freeze on the trigger and that he could never physically do it. It was during this time he befriended a young 5'10", 25-year-old Dutch woman named Renée Hartevelt. Renée was often described as being a popular, attractive social woman. She moved from Holland over to France to study French literature, which was a big passion for her. Issei and Renée started talking to each other at one point, becoming somewhat acquaintances, sometimes helping each other when it came to studying. However, the friendship slowly grew, going for coffees and having dinner at each other's houses. In an interview, Sagawa said this: "I didn't acknowledge Renée's existence until near the end of the course. I never seen a woman like her before. I didn't want to be caught staring, so I drew a sketch of her." One night, June the 11th, 1981, Renée went over to Issei's house. Renée needed some help studying for an optional class that she wanted to attend to, but sadly missed. Issei lied and said that he attended the class, and that he would gladly help her with her studying. Renée went to his apartment that night, just like any other night. They were chatting on his sofa when he got up to make some dinner. She got up and went to the window. Issei came back from the kitchen with a rifle and pointed it at the back of her neck. He took the shot, and sadly, that was the tragic end of Renée Hartevelt. He apparently said in an interview when he took the shot, he apparently fainted. Whether this is true or not, only Issei knows the truth. When he, quote, woke up from fainting, he disturbingly her before cutting up her body parts and storing them in the freezer. He ended up eating her breast, her thighs, her face, and many other body parts, taking pictures of the process. He had, quote, spare body parts, unquote, that he needed to get rid of. With there not being enough room in the freezer and the summer Paris sun, he was afraid he would become easily noticed of his disturbing actions by his neighbours. With this in mind, over the space of 2 days, he stored the leftover body parts in suitcases, and on June the 13th, 2 days after the murder, at 8 AM, he called for a taxi. He even asked the taxi driver to help him with the suitcases in the boot of the taxi, as he was too small at 5'0". Issei reported that the taxi driver even jokingly said, "Wow, these bags are heavy. Is there a body in here or something?" To which Issei laughed it off. They got into a taxi and drove to a local nearby park close to where he lived. The park was called Bois de Boulogne. He knew the park fairly well, as he often came here for walks or to study. However, by the time he got there, he came to a newfound realization. How was he going to dispose of the body by a busy lake by the park without anyone noticing it in the bright daylight? So he decided to sit down on a park bench and think about his next move. He laid the suitcases down near some grass, only several feet behind him, so they wouldn't appear to be his. After some time had passed, 2 runners jogged by and noticed these abandoned suitcases with blood dripping from them. They walked over to one of the suitcases and questioned Issei, "Are these yours?" "No," Issei replied, and the man proceeded to open the suitcase, where the remains of a human leg started to poke out as he unzipped. A woman who saw all this a few meters away screamed. Issei got up from the park bench and proceeded to walk home. It wasn't long until he was caught by French police, with only 4 days after the park incident.
Horrible fait divers naît de la découverte de valises sanglantes dans le bois de Boulogne. Il s'agissait des restes d'une jeune néerlandaise assassinée par un étudiant japonais dans des conditions, vous allez le voir, effroyables.
Issei actually admitted to everything to French police, but the trial would still go on for about 2 years. His dad paid for good lawyers, and the verdict was that Issei was deemed clinically insane and not capable of standing trial by the French judge. The public were already angry at the fact that he was being kept over here on trial via the taxpayers' expense, so with these 2 former points, he got deported back to Japan where he was trialed over there. However, there was a problem there though. The Japanese courts needed evidence for a trial so they could actually charge him with the crime of murder and cannibalism, but the courts in France closed the case when Issei moved to Japan. This meant that Japanese courts couldn't access important sealed documents or access important information that was needed in order to charge Issei. So, this meant that Issei was simply released.
Il s'appelle Issei Sagawa, japonais né à Kobe il y a 32 ans. Jeudi dernier, il a tué d'une balle dans la tête sa camarade de faculté, Renée Hartevelt, une Hollandaise de 25 ans. Puis il a dépecé le corps, l'a conservé chez lui jusqu'à samedi soir, et pendant ces 2 jours, à plusieurs reprises, il a mangé des morceaux de la chair de sa victime.
On August the 12th, 1986, Sagawa got checked out from hospital and set out to live life as a free man. This unsurprisingly actually gained worldwide coverage, and the case was hugely criticised by many across the world. This is where I really question reality, as from 1986 onwards he became somewhat of a Japanese celebrity, often appearing as a guest speaker on many Japanese shows, speaking about his actions in a way that almost seemed like celebrating what he did. People celebrated him in Japan. Even in interviews, a supposedly sorrowful Issei that was apparently regretful of his actions Japan still celebrated him, treated him like a star even.
1月5日、新宿の小劇場タイニーアリス。ここで佐川さんをゲストの一人に迎えて、クレイジーサラダというイベントが行われた。
In 1992, he starred in a Japanese film called Uwakizuma Gyokuzume, which stands for Unfaithful Wife, Shameful Torture, as a sadosexual voyeur. This was an exploitation film by the director Hisayasu Sato. He starred in several pornographic films where he reenacted his crimes. He even went and wrote several books that included detailed descriptions of the murder and cannibalisms of his crime, even openly talking about his desires of cannibalism, often describing it as, quote, just a fetish, unquote. He later began working as a writer, working for a magazine called The Spa, reviewing restaurants around Japan. However, in the late 90s up to the early noughties, his fame started to wear off. He needed money and struggled to make a living. In his words in an interview, he once said, "Being forced to make a living while being known as a murderer and a cannibal was a terrible punishment." Surprise, surprise. It's hard to find a job when you're a well-known murderer and cannibal, apparently. In 2005, his parents died and was forced to live in public housing where he would be on state benefits. In 2013, Sagawa was hospitalized from a cerebral infection, which permanently damaged his nervous system. He later lived alone and needed daily assistance, which was provided by his younger brother or from caregivers. On the 24th of November 2022, Sagawa died from pneumonia complications in hospital in Japan at the age of 73. He once said, "Maybe if we had one more dinner, I wouldn't have ate her." So there we have it. There's the story of Issei Sagawa. So when I was doing some research into what would be my first YouTube true crime video, I was looking through all the internet, looking through all of Reddit, trying to come up with like quite a unique niche story to tell as my first story. And I got about halfway through the script and then I realized like how dark this actually was. I'll be honest with you, I was going to scrap it about halfway through. I thought to myself, this is too dark, it's a bit too much. And I kind of realized something kind of clicked because this YouTube channel is going to be a YouTube channel about true crime, about horror, about the dark side of life. And I thought to myself, when it comes to true crime, there is no light-hearted true crime. True crime is murder, it's other subjects, and yeah, so I decided to persevere with it anyway. And frustratingly so. I say frustrating because all of it is just frustrating. I feel like there was no justice at all whatsoever in the story. I feel like there was no justice for the victim, for a start. That's the biggest one. There was no justice for the victim. The fact that he managed to just get away with it scot-free is frustrating as anything. What's also frustrating is Issei Sagawa himself. Like, he is unbelievably intolerable, I feel like, in interviews, because at first I thought to myself, oh, he's sorry for his actions, he's sorry for what he did, it seems like. But then something clicked when I kept on watching more and more interviews about him. I realized he is sorry and self-loathing. He is sorry for how his life ended up as a result of his actions. He's not sorry for the actions that he did. A perfect example of that is he constantly saying or talking about his life in interviews. He constantly talks about his life. He never says like how he's sorry for what he did. And when he does say that, it always immediately follows with, because my life turned out this way, not because of the actions that he did. He actually said in an interview that he was suicidal. But again, even then, he did even state the murder at that point. Again, he was just talking about his life. So yeah, truly, truly intolerable, man. Frustrating as anything. All of it, himself, his personality, the actual case, how Japan celebrated him, and just all of it. But I decided to persevere with the story, and I wanted to tell the story because I wanted to expose Issei for the scumbag that he is. I mean, it doesn't take a lot of exposing to realize what. You can just quickly look at his actions and say, yeah, that guy's a scumbag. But anyway, guys, I hope you liked the video. If you liked the video, give it a like, give it a subscribe. It'll help this channel grow. I really appreciate it. Take care and stay safe.